that's the next generation, and all the young people I've met, they come much more naturally to this idea that you don't need to be an expert. And I think even in my organization, which was generally a fairly gray-haired, older expert organization, it's beginning to change, and people recognize that a 22-year-old can have some really great contributions. And that's a big difference from when I first came to MSH 20 years ago, where I was told, well, you have nothing to offer because you're not an expert, so you don't need people like you. And I think that's changing, and I see it changing in Africa. I introduced a group that I worked with a lot in Mali to open space, and that's totally antithetical to anything they do. Like the idea that you wouldn't have an agenda. Everybody's been teaching people for the last 20 years to have an agenda and determine outcomes and all of that. And so now comes this methodology that said none of that. And so at first when I introduced them, they were just very nervous about this. But then they caught the excitement and the idea that actually a group can set its own agenda without it having been imposed by a donor. It's now the donors that are sort of get very anxious. Because I tried to get AID, a big conference that cost a lot of money and 2 years of preparation and with flights back and forth, and I tried to talk them out of it and say, let's just get all these 200 people and do an open space. And they can't do that. But I think this is a social change where you have to have maybe a 200-year, 300-year perspective. One of my favorite concept is the 200-year present. And it comes from Elise Boulding. And Elise Boulding is a Quaker, and our Quaker community had invited her to come and talk with us. And so we sat with her in an evening potluck, and she is, I don't know if you know her, but you know about her, of course.
Jenna Fisher?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And she is just a wonderful, wonderful woman. She's one of my heroes. And she introduced us to this notion of the 200-year present, which has been one of those really influential concepts for me. And the idea is that the present is everything that's covered by the oldest person alive now and the person that's born now. So roughly, the oldest person is around 100, give or take a few years. And there are some babies being born now who will be 100. So when you think about that, you have a 200-year period, which is the present, that's experienced by people on this earth right now. And that is such a liberating concept because it takes you out of the, we have to do this now, immediately. And when people say, this world is falling apart and what a mess we're in, then all you have to think about, where were we 100 years ago? Or if you look at this 100 years that way, 100 years in the future. Then in 100 years, which is only half of the present, we have come a huge way. And, think about the south of the United States, what happened 100 years ago, what went unreported or was condoned. Think about Africa, think about, you think about the way we use chemicals even 50 years ago. So, yeah, there's a lot of stuff maybe that's not good right now. But even when I think about all the stuff that's happening in agribusiness, so there is now a growing movement that's beginning to push back at that. So I think there's something, when something gets to a certain level of access, there is a new wave that builds up from below to counter it. And certainly in the food and nutrition, I see that increasingly. And I myself, I'm an example of that. I'm totally oblivious of how I was contributing to farmers' misery and all of that in the way my buying habits. And so I'm getting increasingly woken up to that, and so there's one other person, and I'm talking to other people, and so I'm very optimistic. So I think we can get rid of a lot of excesses and things that aren't right in the next 100 years, and we'll create a few more in the next 100 years, and then there will be another 100 years. But if you think about that way, you don't have to be so incredibly impatient, and I think it's our impatience that leads to a lot of our problems. Talking about the grub problem or any of our things that require systemic solutions, and our impatience gets in the way. very optimistic about this.